Alrighty, so the past couple of 3D print videos I have done have been very expensive, intermediate, and expert level 3D printers with high price points. But today we're gonna take a look at something that is sub $300, which I haven't done in a long time. We're looking at the Anycubic Kobra 2 Pro. And I don't want that price to fool you. This has a ton of great features and the specs will absolutely wow you for the price. So if you're somebody who's just starting out into 3D printing, you don't want to spend a lot of money, but you want to have some of those higher end features, this should be at the top of your list. Let's get started. What's good, everybody? Ken here. You're watching OriginaldoBo, and this is the Anycubic Kobra 2 Pro. It's a bit of a mouthful, but this is a bed slinger printer. It has a ton of amazing features. It's a direct drive printer. It has auto bed leveling. It has a built-in LCD touchscreen. It has a filament runout sensor to the right-hand side. Power supply is neatly tucked in the center. And most of all, it's a tiny printer that also can print to speeds up to 500 millimeters per second, which is hanging right in there with all the top dogs in the 3D print world. So I've been testing this over the past 2.5 weeks now, and I've ran this through prints that I've printed that I've downloaded on Thingiverse, and also my own prints that I have designed. Remember, with all of my testing, I try to make sure that this is capable of printing the prints that I sell on my Etsy store, because it's good enough to sell on Etsy. It's good enough for you to be able to print at home. So those are my my requirements when I'm testing these printers. So like I said, this is a bed slinger design, and if you're new to 3D printing, that just means the bed is going to move forwards and backwards. Of course, there's always pros and cons when you're buying a 3D printer. Some people like these, some people don't, because there could be a risk at higher speeds to topple over taller prints. But I will tell you that the PEI textured build plate that this has on here hasn't let me down yet, and I haven't had any need for glue. I haven't had any issues with prints coming off the build plate. Like I said, there's also auto bed leveling built in. They're calling it their Levy Q 2.0, and I have to say it does a pretty good job. One of the most painstaking things when it comes to 3D printing is leveling the bed. So having a 3D printer that has auto bed leveling is a huge plus. It will save you a lot of time and aggravation, and ultimately make your first experience with 3D printing a lot more enjoyable. I do not miss the days of using the old Ender 3s and just anything without auto bed leveling. This is an absolute joy to use. So this printer is also equipped with a direct drive. Now that direct drive is a dual gear extruder, and essentially that just means the filament's gonna come from the spool and head directly into the extruder itself, thus allowing you to print much more flexible materials like TPU. For you guys that are into FPV and you wanna print TPU mounts and TPU components for your FPV quads, this printer absolutely annihilates TPU, and it does an amazing job. It also has a filament runout sensor in there, so if you're somebody who likes to take your rolls of filament all the way down to the brink of exhaustion, you'll be happy to know it will tell you when your filament is out, and it will pause the print, which is pretty fantastic. So this has a single Z-axis motor, so it's not a dual axis Z motor. However, it can still achieve speeds up to 500 millimeters per second. And that's one of the big highlight features over the Kobra 2 is the speed that this can achieve. Now, don't let that speed fool you, because you're not gonna try to print your typical prints at 500 millimeters per second. It's just not sustainable for good quality prints. It's cool as a parlor trick, and if you're printing a really fast, let's say Benchy or something, it's cool to do, but ultimately you're just never gonna really find yourself printing that fast, and it's just not conducive if you're looking for quality. So what I have found is this machine can sustain quality at about 220 to 250 millimeters per second. It does have acceleration jerk of up to 2000 millimeters per second, which is right on par with what Bamboo and Cheetah is offering as far as speeds go. Now the build volume is 250 by 220 by 220. It is not the biggest build volume, but I think somebody that is just starting out with 3D printing, or if you're just printing parts for drones, it is more than adequate. For me, from a production standpoint, with some of the products that I do print, I don't find this to be tall enough to print some of the mics that I designed. So I can print my shorter mics, which I'll show you the quality that I was able to get off of those here in a little bit. But I wasn't able to print my super tall mics because they're over 10 inches, and it just maxes out the bandwidth of what this Z-axis can actually handle. So if you're looking for printing like helmets or bigger components, you may want to look at the max version of this. But if you're looking for something that can just print drone parts and just, everyday fun stuff, this build volume is more than adequate. All right, along with that built-in bed leveling, we also have resonance detection and calibration, but essentially this will run through when you first set this up and do a resonance calibration. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes and it really puts it through the shakes. Having it on this table, even though this table is what I would say pretty stable, it was shaking it pretty good just testing the resonance. And it does make a difference having input shaping. This print was printed in about 26 minutes, 27 minutes, and it looks absolutely phenomenal using the Anycubic PLA. And I think that's a lot in part to do with the input shaping. Printers without input shaping, you definitely notice a quality drop at the higher speeds, not so much at the lower speeds, but definitely when you start pushing it 250, 300 millimeters per second, and you're trying to save time, that's when having input shaping really matters the most. All right, let's talk about this 4.3-inch touchscreen, because this is pretty much my favorite aspect of this printer. It's nice to see such a premium touch on such a budget-friendly printer. The interface is dead simple to navigate. It's very intuitive for a beginner to figure out how they need to navigate through it. And when you first boot it up, there's a lot of prompts to guide you to download the Anycubic companion app, which can help you through the setup process and update firmware. You can also download the slicer from Anycubic's website, which I would encourage you to do. I have both Mac and Windows, and I was able to install it on both Windows and Mac. I did have some initial issues with the file that was on the SD card, or I should say the USB drive from Anycubic with the Mac version, but heading over to their website and downloading the most current version fixed the problems with the crashing, so you can use it on either or, and I'm running the newest Macs with the new Mac Silicon. But the interface, I think, is pretty easy to use. The touchscreen is very sensitive. I didn't really find any issues. A lot of times when you get a 3D printer and it has a touchscreen, you got to really sit there and press it because it's not the most touch capacitive sensitive screens that they put in these, but I have to say this is pretty good. There is an audible beep as you're going through the different settings in which you can turn that off. And yeah, overall, I don't see any issues with that. You do have 3 USB ports on the front of here. You have one that can be used for a webcam if you want to host a webcam. And if I didn't make mention of this already, you do have access to Wi-Fi on this. So this can be an always connected 3D printer, much like BREW and others have transitioned to, where you can connect to the web and send prints directly from your slicer. Now, I did download the Anycubic slicer. I sliced out a print, I tried sending it to the printer, and I don't think it was working. It would never actually upload the G-code, so I don't know if that's something that Anycubic has to work out. So I'm not really sure what's happening there. You can use the Prusa slicer as well, but the same thing goes for that. You're not going to be able to slice and upload your G-code directly to the printer from Prusa. Prusa Slicer also does require you to do a configuration. There is a config file on the USB drive that they did include that has all the settings and everything that you need to get this to work. I did have to do some additional tuning to make sure all my fans were functioning properly, but I would just recommend for any beginner to just go ahead and use the Anycubic Slicer. It is dead simple to use and it works very similar to Prusa Slicer. All right, let's talk about the quality of prints because I know that's what everybody is most interested in. So I ran a series of prints like I normally do. I typically will test PLA, PETG, and TPU. I'm disregarding ASA and ABS because I don't have an enclosure to put this in, and it wouldn't be a fair comparison to do that without keeping this enclosed and in a controlled environment. So I first started off with the PLA. This PLA is from Anycubic, and I just ran a typical benchy. This benchy completed, and I think it took about 27 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 29 minutes, but overall the quality of it is really exceptional. The detail is good. There's very minimal imperfections. There's a little bit of that sort of angel hair stringing, but that's honestly pretty normal at printing at such high speeds. It does have a nice little glossy sheen to it. You'll see when I transition over to show you the microphones that I did, and I was using Duramic PLA Plus, I have much more of a matte-like finish to those, which I sort of prefer the matte finish, even though it does scratch a little bit easier. So these microphones typically have taken me about 3 3.5 hours for these to print. I'm printing 2 at a time on this machine. Now, these are my smaller microphones, and I find that these work really well on this, and I can print 2, sometimes 3 at a time. I did go ahead and try printing out my ribbed riders. These are my Avata duck guards. Now, these came out really exceptional. And again, with the direct drive dual gear extruder, I wouldn't expect anything less. I'm getting very, very similar results to that of what I'm getting on my Bamboo machine. I hate to keep making comparisons, but those are machines that I print this type of things out on each and every day. So I have to make that comparison to be fair, of course. But I don't see really any true show-stopping issues. My supports came off like normal. It does take a little bit of time to figure out the slicer and figure out how you can make your supports a little bit easier to peel. But once I got that down, the prints were coming out perfect. But anytime you start doing something when it comes to 3D printing, there is going to be some amount of playing around and jerkery with anything that you do. And then the last thing I did, I went ahead and printed my Bad Idea mount. These are the mounts that I am printing for the Avata GoPro mounts. Now, I switched over last year to printing these out of PETG. It does better in all weather conditions, especially when wintertime comes. I find that these things break a lot less. So I printed these out of PETG. This is just a Polymaker PETG, nothing really super expensive or special. And I think that they came out fine. There's a slight gloss to them, which again, you may like it or hate it. I, again, prefer that flatter look that I'm getting out of the Duramic PLA Plus. But again, I still think these look great. The layer adhesion was perfect. I really didn't have any issues. And PETG is a very temperamental material to print with, depending on what brand of PETG you go with. But again, with the Polymaker material, I've really found no problems with it, and it works fantastic. So overall, with all of the prints that I have done so far, from the prints that I have printed that I have designed to some that I've just printed off of Thingiverse, I haven't had any issues. And realistically, when you're buying a printer, that's what you want. Now, there are some things about this printer that I don't like, and one of them is this build sheet. And if I'm being just like super nitpicky, the build sheet should have some sort of stoppers on the backside. So when you take it off to reset a print, you can get it on. They do have like this little rubber piece here, which is like a little nozzle wiper, but they don't actually have anything to stop you from sliding this build sheet off the backside. So you have to sort of, put your finger back here and make sure you get it down just right. It's a bit of a pain in the butt. I wish they would have put like some pegs or something. It would have been just something simple that they could have did to make that much better. And then the last thing is, yes, this is a loud printer a little bit because the fans get really, really ramped up, and it is a little bit louder than I would like. But overall, I don't think that it's too terribly bad, but it's just something I wanted to make mention of because it is not a silent piece of equipment. At max speed, I mean, it's like a little hurricane happening here. So that is something that you'll want to keep in mind. But overall, the footprint of this printer is relatively small. If you decide not to use this filament spool and you get one from Amazon, you can just mount it onto the side of the printer, just like sideways parallel with the printer. And I think that that will save a little bit of space and make this much more compact because it is overall a very simple printer in size. Assembly is pretty much dead simple. You have to mount your touchscreen, which takes 3 bolts to mount that. And then you have 4 bolts that mount the Z carriage, and that's basically it. You're done. Run it through its calibrations, plug in the motors. And if I didn't make mention of it already, yes, you do have to bolt up the extruder as part of the assembly, but it does make replacement and repairs a little bit easier since it can come off so easy, and it's not actually relying on any sort of belt drive system to take the extruder off. The belt system actually runs behind the extruder, so again, makes repairs and maintenance that much easier. But overall, I'm very impressed with this printer for the size and the price. Right now, they have a sale. It's like $279, making this very, very tangible and probably a pretty good Christmas gift for somebody. Again, if you're looking at getting into 3D printing and you don't want to spend over $300 for a 3D printer, I think for the specs, the price, and the performance, it checks off all the boxes that I would need in a 3D printer if I was a hobbyist and I'm not doing this for production work. But anyways, if you're interested in this, I will include a link in the description. I'm sorry this is a long video. I am pretty meticulous and anal when it comes to 3D printers because I expect a lot from them. Even if they cost such a low amount of money, they should still perform to their utmost standard, and this one definitely knocks it out of the park. So really don't have any bad things to say about Anycubic. I've been pretty happy with their products in the past. So all in all, I'm excited to see what they do next. I would love to see a Core XY machine for them in 2024. We'll see what happens. Well, that's going to do it for this video. As always, stay original.
I heard they checking for me, no one checking on me, so I had to go run up a check. I got the message on me, ain't no flexing on me, my attorney gon' call and collect. Blessings on blessings for me, my successes only made them envious, they got upset. I had to put all their egos in check.